I'm pleased to be joined by members of the leadership team of New Road School, an independent private school in Los Angeles, California. My guests include Lutheran Williams, head of school, Daniela Panisse, assistant head of school, Mario Johnson, director of student well-being and human development, and Mark Vickers-Willis, director of community engagement. New Road School has a long-standing foundational commitment to diversity, educating a diverse student body with 45% students of color and 40% receiving financial aid. I invited New Road School to tell us about their journey to become an, quote, incubator of human potential, end quote, and to tell us about how they seek to develop a learning habitat where every person is respected and welcomed. And then Lutheran, I'm hoping you'll be able to tell us about New Road School and why it was founded as we begin the conversation.
Thank you for having us here today. It is my pleasure to tell you a little bit about the New Road story. As I think about the New Road story, it's so clear to me that that story is deeply rooted in the promise of the Enlightenment, which finds expression in America. And when I think about the promises of the Enlightenment and how they find expression in America, I think about our Declaration of Independence. And I've always been fascinated by the first few lines that were written in 1776. We hold these truths to be self-evident, that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights, and that among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. The idea that human beings had the right to experience life, liberty, and happiness, that they should have the conditions to be able to fulfill their potential, that they should be able to participate in governing themselves and in their government. All of these ideas are built on this assumption of the inherent worth and dignity of each person. And as I think about the story of New Roads, I realize that it begins there, because in that document, it says all men. All men. It leaves out women. It leaves out whites who are unpropertied. It leaves out African Americans who look like me. Leaves out Native Americans. And the list of people for whom that promise did not extend goes on and on. Now, fast forward to 1954, Brown versus the Board of Education. That was the decision that allowed American schools to be integrated. That integration was resisted by many because I think the assumption was that integration would actually lessen the educational quality for white students, that African Americans were unworthy and unable to participate in the same kinds of schools as whites. And I think the notion was diversity is a threat. My mother in 1959 graduated from high school. She went to a segregated school because in her small hometown of Eunice, Louisiana, people resisted integration. My mother went to a school where there were only 12 students in the graduating class, all African American. They learned from the same secondhand books that were given to them from the white school. They were the books they no longer needed, some with pages torn out, some out of date, but they did their best to learn all they could. My mom, you'll see in the picture, was voted most beautiful girl, something that meant a lot to her. And she also graduated when she was 16. She skipped 2 grades. She wanted to be a doctor. But for an African-American woman in a small town, that was a dream that she was not basically by the system of our society nurtured to believe was a possibility for her. My mother wanted so much more for her own children. And when we moved to California, My parents were determined to give us the very best education they could. There were 5 of us, and they couldn't send us all to private school, and we lived in the San Fernando Valley of California. And my parents realized in our Black working class neighborhood that the schools were not as highly achieving as the schools in the more affluent white communities. They said, we can't afford to send you all to private school, but we can send you to the white school if we move to that community. They did. And, I was able to get a wonderful education. The picture you'll see of me is from 1776 to 1976, 200 years later. I am actually dressed like the American flag because I was the mascot on my brother's team. I was 7 years old. I was the beneficiary of integration. I got an excellent academic education, but I always felt like I had to prove that I wasn't less than, that I was enough, that I was worthy to be there. I'll never forget being in an AP calculus class and walking in and feeling that everybody was looking at me because I was the only African-American student. Whether that was true or not, that's what I had in my head. And I had the sense that I had to wear a mask and armor because I was suspect and I was a perpetual visitor in that school. I never felt like I truly belonged. Fast forward to 1995, shortly after the Rodney King riots and 40 years after Brown, there were these visionary founders who said, there needs to be a school where kids live and learn together if this American social experiment is going to work. So in 1995, they created New Road School to be socioeconomically, racially, and culturally diverse and reflective of the population of Los Angeles, so that the kids would be not only prepared better for college and for life, but that they would be able to make our democratic society work. They opened up a new road, and that new road was built on the assumption that children have infinite potential and that school should be an incubator that allow for children to have an invitation to discover who they are, what they care about, and to embrace the full spectrum of humanity. And an assumption that diversity is essential to academic excellence and to optimal conditions for learning. We moved from the definition of integration that I experience to integrative with New Roads, where our schooling can be leveraged, can leverage authentic diversity and transform itself into an integrative field of well-being for liberating human potential. At New Roads, every child is given the invitation to remove their mask and to remove their armor and to become all that they authentically can be. And that is built on a foundation of well-being. I'm very proud to be a part of such a school that I wish I had attended.
Mario, I'm going to go to you next, but Lutheran, I just want to say thank you for that background and for that historical perspective that you brought to us to expand it just beyond the beginning of the school, so we might appreciate just how profound such the beginning of a school is for you and for many others. Mario, as Director of Student Wellbeing and Human Development, you have quite a responsibility on your shoulders. So I'm wondering if you could speak a little bit, kind of tease out something that I heard Lutheran say about creating a generative learning environment that honors the inherent dignity and worth of each person and their common humanity. What does that actually mean and look like within the context of New Road School?
Thank you, Maureen. I'd like to begin answering your question with direct student perspectives from two recent graduates, because they provide an embodied representation of key features of our educational experience that I'll be talking about.
And that takes me to the reason I chose to come to New Roads out of all the schools I had looked at in the first place. And no, it was not the bagels and hot chocolate we got every Friday morning at the elementary school, I promise. When my parents asked my brother and I where we wanted to attend and why, my reason for going to New Roads was that the people here made me comfortable. So thanks, guys. But my brother, yeah, sure, thanks, you guys. You guys did it for me, so I appreciate you all. Now, my brother, he chose Crossroads instead. I'm sure he's watching, crying on the live stream right now. And we've since disowned him. It's a big mistake on his part. And well, I'm sure he had a great time. I know for a fact that the student body there, I'm sorry, Charlie, but I gotta say it, the student body there, and anywhere else for that matter, didn't and doesn't have the same heart at New Roads. That's why a 9-year-old kid like me, who couldn't even walk up to the Starbucks barista to ask for a cup of water, and who still gets red-faced in pretty much every conversation, even giving this speech right now, actually, I was confident enough to go to Ben Brier's birthday party and jump on his trampoline with a bunch of people I had just met days earlier, because I knew that I was already at home with you all. That same feeling, I might use a Kleenex here. That same feeling has since allowed me to pursue what makes me happy without fear of judgment. It's how I was able to start debating in 7th grade and start playing for the basketball team in 12th. I see you in the back, Coach Trey, by the way. It's how I broke out of my social shell. It's how I've become who I am now as an actual adult, not just as a 6th grader.
During orientation, I looked around and saw very few faces that looked like mine. I thought, well, this place is definitely different than what I'm used to. And honestly speaking, I didn't know if I meant that in a good way or bad. I knew that New Roads was known for teaching its kids to be intellectually curious, daring, compassionate, understanding, loving, and free. However, did that mean that I needed to be like the majority of the other kids to achieve my goals? My head started spinning as I thought about how out of place I suddenly felt. I felt an impulse just to follow everyone and copy what they were doing. During lunch, I began to distance myself because I didn't know if I had a place in what was known as the Rainbow Tribe. I then began to doubt my decision to attend this school that I knew would provide me with countless amount of opportunities for personal growth. By the end of lunch, with questions of transferring out running around in my mind and not expecting what was to come, next, I headed to the final class of the day, Mysteries. This is where things got interesting. The instructor, Mo, was one of the most coolest and authentic teachers that I encountered that day. She opened the freshman council class with a series of questions that changed the trajectory of my life and defined my high school career. Who are you? And who do you hope to become 4 years down the line, she asked. And once again, my head started spinning as I silently thought to myself, who am I really? And who do I want to become? And how do I want to feel? It was the first space that I ever entered that was focused solely on what it means to be a young adult, trying to find your way in the world, and more importantly, within yourself. It was during that class that I decided that I would not spend my high school years enduring imposter syndrome, that I would show up as me, Aliyah Mack in all of her glory, a strong, caring, nurturing, thoughtful, opinionated Black girl from Inglewood who spoke with an undeniably Black LA accent.
The framing, I'm just going to jump right into things, because the kids said so much. The framing in which we conceptualize our human development approach begins with climate and culture. Climate and culture are akin to the air we breathe and the water we consume to sustain us. Both are so ubiquitous as to go unnoticed, particularly by teenagers, yet constitute the essential conditions to sustain life and health. In the case of a high school, climate and culture determine whether young people feel seen, heard, and valued versus invisible, insignificant, and worthless. Ben captured the essence of this when he talked about feeling so comfortable in his own skin in school that he was free to explore other aspects of his burgeoning self. Now, New Roads is not a convent. We've got our stuff like any other host to the future of greatness. But I've got to tell you, Maureen, we take great pride in the fact that both Ben and Alia, and by extension, the mainstay of our students, say they didn't exhaust themselves worrying about how to survive high school. Instead, they were inspired. For the purposes of this brief discussion, New Roads Climate and Culture can be distilled down to 3 principal affirmative human development practices: radical inclusion, relational orientation, and holistic integration. Radical inclusion is all about the big embrace. When kids are encouraged to show up as their most authentic selves and always respect others for doing the same, it instills a deep sense of value for autonomy, authenticity, difference, and acceptance. Our goal is to get kids to feel comfortable and safe enough to remove the mask that they often feel they have to wear as protective armor against their own peers. Our motto is, if you have enough courage to love and accept yourself for who you most genuinely identify as, we're here to embrace you. This is what Alia was talking about when she described how feeling comfortable and the deep sense of belonging allowed her to lean proudly into all the aspects of her identity that define her as a young Black woman, despite the fact that she, quote, didn't look like most of the other students, end quote. Second, there's the practice of relational orientation, which is all about integrating self-care, care for others, and care for the planet into an embodied reality of how we hold space and connect with the universe. Our teaching eschews any promotion of mere transactional exchanges among those within our community. Instead, we teach youth that one of the most critical capacities to adopt is the ability to establish, build, and sustain healthy relationships. Ben talked a lot about the deeply meaningful relationships he developed with kids who were vastly different from himself, yet had built solid connections rooted in shared identities and/or interests. He also talked about how these relationships functioned as nourishment for his soul. Beautiful words. Our relational orientation honors the linkages among diverse individuals in a radically inclusive social field while generating an abiding appreciation for healthy, transformative relationships, which for us is the root of wellness and well-being. Lastly, there's the practice of holistic integration. The Brown versus Board determination of integration was strictly focused on the legal mandate surrounding social interaction, which was compulsory and therefore largely resisted. Holistic integration is precisely the opposite. It is the affirmation of our institution's values, respect for the inherent dignity and humanity of human beings, diversity, social justice, ecological stewardship, love, reflected in all aspects of our operation through positive relationships among individuals and groups. In this way, holistic integration serves as a conduit between radical inclusion and relational orientation, insofar as the social and emotional cohere in the practice. The goal is to foster, create, nurture, and sustain a dynamic variety of opportunities for integrating individuals and groups across a wide spectrum of difference, with the goal of achieving a harmonious cacophony within a healthy, joyous relational field. New Roads is all jazz, a harmonious cacophony. In terms of student life, holistic integration is achieved through academic and co-curricular programming. With such limited time, I'd like to briefly describe 4 signature co-curricular programs. Mysteries is a grade-specific human development class where students gather on a weekly basis to practice counsel. Through counsel, youth develop deep interpersonal communication skills across a field of radical diversity. Mysteries fosters a basic understanding and appreciation for those who are radically different from us. Our Student Leadership Congress, SLC, is our premier student leadership organization. Broadly speaking, SLC is a venue and platform where student leaders develop their skills as community leaders. Volunteering, organizing, communication, vision mapping, action planning, student body mobilizing, etc. The team itself is a snapshot representation of the many expressions of diversity that constitute our community. Students are diverse at the levels of age, race, class, gender, socioeconomic status, ability, sexual orientation, primary language, neural differentiation, academic performance, and the list goes on. SLC fosters learning how to solve problems and achieve communal goals with those who are radically different from us. The workshop program for social justice and ecological stewardship is our service and apprenticeship learning program through which youth manifest our 3 pillars of global engagement: diversity, social justice, and ecological stewardship. Workshop fosters achieving interest convergence with those who are radically different from us. Lastly, the Independent Study Project Program, ISP, is for students who have a specified passion for, interest in, or curiosity about a particular topic, activity, phenomenon, etc., and are given an opportunity to engage in a year-long guided scholarly exploration. ISP fosters a breakdown between school and the world, wherein students begin to understand that life is school and school is life. Education is a process, and curious thinkers never cease to be schooled by life. The next student speaker will provide an opportunity for you to hear a direct account of holistic integration achieved through our co-curricular programming. So Maureen, wrapping up my response to your question about what it means and looks like in the context of a school to create a generative learning environment that honors the inherent dignity, worth, and common humanity of each person, New Roads' climate and culture stand at the center of our education paradigm. We believe in the power of the big embrace. When youth are positively encouraged to express the uniqueness of their being in all its manifestations, the result is that their field of acceptance is broadened and their sense of perspective enhanced. Further, when youth are taught that each individual provides a valuable contribution to the whole, their sense of belonging is affirmed. Kids begin to open up, to know they matter and where they fit in the world. Finally, when schools foster an environment and programming that seek to ensure that each individual has countless opportunities to participate in relationships where they are seen, heard, valued, and affirmed, they become genuine generative learning spaces that transform the very lives of the youth entrusted to their care. Thank you so much, Maureen.
Mario, thank you. I like that. Seen, heard, valued, and affirmed. Powerful, powerful principles. The impact of that on the individual. And thank you for sharing the student videos so that they could speak from that experience. Daniela, I'd like to explore in a little more detail the kind of pedagogy that fosters humanity that is authentically diverse and the well-being of students in body, mind, and spirit. Clearly, Mario spoke to some of that, but if you could tell us a little bit more about your curricular program, that would be welcomed as we look at how New Roads School is creating this environment for its students and teachers.
Thank you, Maureen. Mario talked about a student who would demonstrate how holistic integration is achieved through his independent study project. So I'd like to take a moment to listen to Liam.
Hi, my name is Liam and I'm a junior and I've been at New Roads since 6th grade. My favorite part so far of high school has been the independent study project known as an ISP. I started my ISP in 10th grade knowing that I was passionate about Los Angeles and affordable housing, and I was looking for an outlet to explore that passion. Now, because the ISP essentially acts as a class, I was actually incentivized to work on my passion, which I really wouldn't have a chance to do otherwise. What began as a very general topic was quickly refined, and now I'm on my 2nd year of that ISP, which I titled Who is Housed When Money Talks, which I named after Barbara Kruger's mural that I pass on my way to school. The ISP has given me a chance to go in depth on the zoning laws in Los Angeles and how this impacts access to affordable housing. The topic is extremely intersectional, involving aspects of sociology, urban studies, race relations, architecture, and much more. Through this project, I also interned for a California Assembly members campaign and presented to the whole upper school about down-ballot voting and the importance that the California state legislature has in making housing and zoning laws. What I learned is that no topic or subject is truly one-dimensional. I could have never predicted how my project is turning out, and the chance to take a topic I like and turn it into a research project where I could truly learn from a place of natural curiosity was instrumental in helping me identify my passion.
As an authentically diverse community, New Roads understands the value of connection, well-being, and joy. Our village delights in learning because our students are engaged in their studies and they participate in their learning through the empathic facilitation of New Roads faculty. As Mario mentioned earlier, we must tear down the walls between school and life. We graduate courageous citizens of conscience that understand holistically their impact through the deep relationships they foster in our community. In turn, our students leave New Roads with a greater sense of belonging, a commitment to the humanity in each of us, deep respect for varying perspectives, and an understanding that radical change for our people and this planet must begin with love and kindness. So how do we achieve all this in our village? To codify our integrative approach to teaching and learning, 3 years ago, we embarked on a journey of self-discovery in our community. We read The Developing Mind by Dr. Dan Siegel, UCLA School of Medicine clinical professor of psychiatry and world-renowned Harvard-trained expert of interpersonal neurobiology. We asked ourselves these questions. What is the role of emotions in the learning process? How do emotions shape the relationships between and among teachers and students that impact the culture and climate of the classroom? What do we need to know as educators and be able to do in order to cultivate this climate and culture for an integrative mind? We are constantly evolving as an institution to meet the needs of our young people. Mario painted you a picture of the climate and culture at New Roads. Our work with Dr. Dan Siegel helped us realize that the young people in our care are not just disembodied brains. They are embodied and present beings. And as such, our faculty, administration, and staff must be attuned to them and be prepared to teach them however they may show up for us. In this vein, their humanity must be recognized, their well-being must be at the core of our teaching, and our curriculum and assessment must evolve to meet them, our young people. As we continue to deepen our educational model at New Roads, we recognize that our practices are beyond brain-based, they are mind-based and connected to our commitments. Our students must be recognized beyond just their cognitive abilities because the mind is within and through each of us and is much more complex than we ever imagined. Mark will touch more on this a little later. However, you cannot teach without first considering the holistic needs of the young people in your care. As educators, we do not teach disembodied brains. The possibilities are endless for our students when they are held by our faculty. The role of the New Roads teacher is the present empathic facilitator of human development, social, emotional, and intellectual, liberator of human potential. Our faculty sees learning through the eyes of the student. Incorporating our learning from Dr. Dan Siegel, we recognize that our students are embodied and our teaching must be meaningful, relevant, and connected for them. This teaching is a liberated pedagogy as it fosters well-being and optimal conditions for learning. Only when learning is embodied can students develop enduring understanding and skills that they can apply in various contexts and contribute to society and the common good. This is learning for life. Our students are encouraged to follow their passions in a non-linear trajectory that honors the human system. Every schedule at New Roads is personalized for each young person in our program. You witnessed this in Liam's description of his independent study project. Liam delights in learning and uses every opportunity in the curricular and co-curricular program to discover who he truly is authentically at New Roads. As is life, New Roads understand learning takes time, connection, and is process and discovery driven. This allows for students to find meaning in their learning and make connections for a lifetime. To summarize my answer, Maureen, New Roads faculty create the container for social, emotional, relational, and intellectual belonging in their classrooms through the climate and culture they encourage. This allows for our students to build authentic and meaningful relationships with their teachers and with one another, helping our young people make meaning of the world through their learning. The container, the sacred space our faculty holds in the magic of their classrooms, honors the individuality of every person while recognizing that at the heart of our teaching is humanity. Thank you.
Thank you, Danielle. I heard so many things. And one word that I think we'll probably come back to again is evolving, a curriculum that's evolving, a way of assisting students that is evolving. But you also shared quite a bit about some of the research you're doing. So Mark, I know that New Roads School does look to the science of the brain and the mind and does research. So what have you learned, particularly from neuroscience and research that supports the efficacy of your approach and educational model?
Maureen, in a nutshell, we use interpersonal neurobiology and the concept of integration. As well, there is a large body of research and evidence highlighting the benefits of racially and socioeconomically integrated schools and classrooms. So essentially, we not only have an authentically diverse learning community, but we know how to leverage it. Our founding commitment is to make sure our school actually reflects the authentic diversity of Los Angeles. As a result, our pedagogical approach has always been grounded in meeting the needs of the students in front of us, honouring their differences and promoting their compassionate linkages in a way that makes learning relevant, meaningful, and connected to the context in which it's taking place. So the students have never been regarded as repositories, but active participants and agents in the process of their learning. At the core of this approach is honouring the humanity of each student and forging relationships that securely attach them to their learning habitat. As Daniela mentioned, we've been working closely with world-renowned neuroscientist and interpersonal neurobiologist, Dr. Dan Siegel. And in answering this question, I'm simplifying years of research and study by leaders in their fields. There are three concepts from Dan's work that have provided the language and conceptual framework to support and codify our approach and model. These concepts relate to the mind, identity, and integration. We believe his work in these areas reveal the faulty assumptions upon which the industrial model of education is built. Interpersonal neurobiology is a study that incorporates traditionally independent fields of research, such as neurobiology, genetics, memory, attachment, complex systems, anthropology, and evolutionary psychology. But simply put, the whole line of reasoning is that our mental lives are embodied and relational. So when we think about the mind is far more than just brain activity. At its simplest and most complex, it is energy flow that occurs within and between. The mind is our subjective experience and consciousness. But the mind is not separate from our bodies or from our relationships. It both arises from them and regulates them. Our relationships to self, other, and our environment shape our developing mind. This is why, as Daniela said, we look at our approach as mind-based education, not just brain-based. Now with identity, when we think about identity, like the mind, it is an emergent process of self-organization. If the mind is both embodied and relational, then it makes sense that our identity is not just limited to our body, but our interconnected relationships also. The assumption of a separate self is problematic and reinforces a narrow and potentially destructive view of ourselves, denying our relationships and our responsibilities. And simultaneously, we think our identity is both embodied, a me, and relational, a we, where we have our own individual integrity, but interconnect and belong to a larger conception than just self. Dan calls this concept moi, and it provides an interconnected pathway to an expansion of consciousness, compassion, resilience, and awareness. The antidote to anxiety, depression, and suicidal ideation we see in epidemic levels in developing countries, particularly in America. Now, integration, this third concept, Mario talked about integration and how that plays out in our co-curricular program. Integration is the fundamental mechanism of health and well-being. Complex emergent systems, like the brain of a student, regulate their own becoming through self-organization that honors the differences and promotes the compassionate linkages of differentiated parts. This is integration. As Mario referred, and our wonderful student Aliyah shared, Mysteries is a practical program-based example of integration in action. When optimal self-organization occurs, we see integrative harmony expressed through flexible, adaptive, coherent, resilient, energized, and stable characteristics. Dan Siegel, Mette Boll, and Peter Senge from MIT describe this as the activation of a social, emotional, relational field. We've learned that our educational approach resonates fully with the view that the mental lives of our students are embodied and relational. Relationships are everything and need to be grounded in dignity and humanity. When a student can present themselves as they truly are, then we can meet them socially, emotionally, and intellectually with a desirable level of challenge within a generative climate and culture. The research and evidence is compelling that this type of habitat can nurture the developing mind and student to their fullest actuality.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate that background you provided for us. As a former school principal, I appreciate that there are always challenges that arise as school leaders and educators seek to realize their mission and seek to implement a pedagogy that speaks to their values. So, Mario, maybe you could describe a challenge that New Road School has faced in seeking to create such a climate and culture for its students.
Thank you, Maureen. We have absolutely faced our challenges. Lutheran always says that the magic is in the mess. In so many ways, this is absolutely true because New Roads is such a human-centered system, and human beings are, well, messy, right? Especially given the radical diversity of thought and being that constitute our community. Accordingly, personal accountability, conflict resolution, communal responsibility for the common good, and the pursuit of joy and well-being stand at the center of our education approach and deeply inform the social, emotional, relational field of engagement. To more clearly explicate this aspect of our discussion, let me go back to the topic of climate and culture. A more lofty way to describe the climate and culture of New Roads is in the context of Dr. Daniel Siegel's theory of integration. Using Dr. Siegel's framing, our climate and culture can be described as a metaphysical, social, emotional, relational field that serves as a container for the dispersion of human energy. Within this social emotional field, everyone is invited to contribute their energy to the space. That contribution is either generative, that is affirmative, or degenerative, that is negative. Both options present a holistic representation of human possibility. The difference is that generative contributions are integrative, while degenerative contributions are disintegrative of the relational field. Our goal as educators is to make students accountable for the energy they bring into a space in an effort to help them understand the larger point that we are all connected. We are all related in some way. This framing and approach are particularly significant in relation to how we handle disciplinary matters. We utilize restorative practices designed to teach youth what it means to be accountable for their contribution to the relational field that informs our individual and collective experience within the New Roads climate and culture. Holistic integration occurs when students realize within their head, heart, and spirit that they personally possess the power to choose how they show up in any relational field, that their contribution not only matters, but is determinative of whether joy or, quite frankly, misery results, and that we all share a communal responsibility for the common good. This process is by no means clean, yet it is authentic, relevant, meaningful, and connected. The greatest challenges, if you will, that we face come from powerful and influential external forces such as social media and the polarized socio-cultural and political environment in which we find ourselves. Young people today have a lot of voices in their head. We now live in a digitally connected world where viewers can click on an icon and be exposed to content that can alter them in ways that we still do not fully understand. Whether it's inappropriate audiovisual imagery or other forms of troubling discursive content, kids, and yes, I did say kids, because they're still children, must be kept safe by us adults as they learn to navigate a messy and complex world. And it begins here in the relationships that we share with one another. We teach young people to always remain attuned to the rampant and extensive desensitization that occurs in many popular digital platforms, to be mindful of the urge to disembody when overengaged, that is, to leave oneself and let the cyber world take over, and resist dehumanizing others as a frustration response, which is so easy to do in the virtual world. In a nutshell, Maureen, we want our kids to embody an awareness that remaining grounded in one's humanity and protecting one's sense of well-being is an active choice that requires attunement and mindfulness of oneself, others, and the environment. The other challenge I spoke of was the toxic, polarized sociocultural and political environment in which we find ourselves. Unfortunately, popular culture, civil and political discourse in far too many spaces has eroded to the point where reason, ethics, and citizenship have taken a back seat to ideologically fueled and driven agendas that have little to do with advancing the common good. Young people are growing up in a politically polarized culture that puts them in fear of being called out and potentially canceled if they find themselves on the wrong side of an issue. New Roads will never yield to those forces. We are an institution of higher learning and personal and collective edification. We affirm that young people have a moral right to be taught how to think, but not what to think. Our responsibility as educators is to impart the critical and normative reasoning skills to allow them to make their own judgments about the complexity and nuances of matters such as the nature of reality, truth, meaning, and so on. New Roads is a place where we encourage young people to be willing to make mistakes, which requires vulnerability. Yet this can't happen when kids are fearful, because fear neurologically and existentially compromises the way we show up, learn and perform, relate to others, and personally evolve. This is where our work becomes most challenging in a politically polarized world. And yet we persist by teaching our students to first seek a restorative approach to conflicts. Next, we ask them to remember the power of grace and forgiveness. And lastly, we encourage them to use the tools of counsel, speak from the heart, listen from the heart, and be lean to call people in to authentic engagement. Whether in the digital or material world, we believe that healthy relational and conflict resolution skills, personal accountability, and communal responsibility for the common good set the stage for the manifestation of joy and personal well-being. Thank you again so much, Maureen.
Oh, I'm thinking the messiness indeed, and sometimes that messiness is elegant and sacred. It helps us to evolve, to step back, and sometimes there's pain involved in that, but that's part of the evolution, the growth. Thank you, Mario, for those examples. You know, we often ask questions, as we have during our conversation, about schools and their unique missions and pedagogy, but we don't always ask about the impact of those schools on their larger community, on the world. So Lutheran, I'd like to close with, I have a question I want to pose with you about that, but it's slightly different. As a school leader, what do you believe is at stake if we don't reimagine education, if we don't seek to create environments and school culture such in the way that New Roads School is seeking to do?
Thank you, Maureen. You guys have heard a lot, and I have really had to do a lot of serious thinking about what matters during this pandemic and what's the lesson. You know, what is the lesson that we have to learn as human beings? And what's become clear to me, you know, from my reading of history and philosophy and even religious texts more recently, is that we need to be able to embrace the common good. And I recently read Corinthians, and there is a quotation that says, when one member suffers, all suffer together. And as I think about New Roads and what it embodies, I think it really does embody this need to honor the differences and to accord each person with respect and dignity while promoting our common humanity. And through that process, students develop empathy and compassion, to me, which are the foundation for the common good, the foundation for cooperation, the foundation for compromise. We've gotten to a point where it's clear that human beings need to evolve to embrace that we're one global human family. If we don't understand the interdependent nature of the human species and our shared destiny and the impact of that on our planet, I don't know how much longer we can survive as a species. I think that existential question is a real one. And so we have to, I think we're called upon as educators to have the will to imagine education in a way that will cultivate human beings who can embrace the full humanity of all people, and human beings who can have love, respect, and compassion for themselves, for others, and for the earth. I think that the time is now. And I'll end with a ray of hope. Our founders said when they founded New Roads, they started with the hypothesis. If you treat young people, and they call them young people, not children, if you treat young people with respect in an environment in which respect is at the heart of the curriculum and the soul of the institution, they will in turn learn to respect each other's differences and do good in the world. That's proven that. And what we as educators are capable of doing, if we have the will, I think is best expressed in a message from one of our students. Let's hear from him.
I grew up in Crenshaw and I attended 3 different schools. And at the last of these 3 different schools, I began to notice that I was really into learning. I had a real aptitude for knowledge and I wanted to excel. But that year in school, I didn't really put my best foot forward because I felt like it wasn't really my place to do so. I feared that people were going to think I was trying to be something that I wasn't. In that environment, I was supposed to play a sport or just barely get by in my classes. It was not really a path in school, or at least in my school, for people like me to just excel academically. It wasn't the normal at all. And so this made me and my friends feel like the best we could do was live down to the preset expectations for us. Fast forward to the next year, and now I'm attending New Roads. And it was a very different place to me, a huge culture shock. At New Roads, we were given way more say in the things that we did and the things that we were able to learn. For instance, on the robotics team here, I was given free rein to accomplish anything I could set my mind to. No one was constantly trying to tell me that I couldn't do something because it was too complex, or trying to make me feel embarrassed for even trying because that's not what people that look like me do. You know, the usual stereotypes. I was always pushed to be a leader instead. I was always pushed to not just be a background character or a gear in the machine, but to actually be the one that is doing the leading. And so that's what I did. Over time, I was able to become a leader on the robotics team and a leader in other facets of my academic career. So since coming to New Roads, I've learned a lot about my place in this world. I've come to realize that I belong anywhere that I choose to belong, and that these preset notions and limitations don't really exist on any of us. At New Roads, people, they just do as they please. They determine their own possibilities despite the stereotypes. Seeing people of color who learned out loud and were praised by the community for it changed my perspective on what I could do and what I could be forever.
Oh, it is so good to have the authentic voice of the student to tell his story about the difference that New Roads School made for him. Thank you for sharing that video. I want to thank all the students who allowed New Roads School to video them over the course of their time at New Roads School. Lutheran, Mario, Daniela, Mark, thank you for expanding my understanding and perspective on the role a school can play in creating more just and caring communities wherein students are educated for liberation and where they're also educated to be the beautiful and potent and loving and respectful and kind and compassionate gifts they are created to be for the world. And I know we could spend hours talking more about your school, and that is why I'm thrilled to let our conference participants know, and we encourage them to check out the New Roads School exhibit booth, where you'll find materials, resources, and other items about what we talked about during this session. In addition, the New Roads School team is going to host a coffee corner And for those of you who'd like to get a little bit more into the weeds and ask them specific questions about how they do what they do, they're going to provide that opportunity for you today. So again, I want to thank New Road School. I want to thank you for all you're doing within that school day in and day out, not only on behalf of your students in the school, but actually the impact you're having beyond that school community as your students go out to be fully living with their full potential. Thank you.